Per request, actually Rush made this video just for you guys because so many of you asked for a video where I was installing the new bottom bracket on the Scwhinn Boundary, Project Boundary. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that means you didn't watch the last video. I'll put a link down in the description, maybe even on your screen so you can catch up. But the old bottom bracket, the factory one, wore out. It's a project bike, so it gets its own new crankset. In this case, I'm going to be using this, the iXF crankset. This is one that I purchased from Alibaba. Usually I buy them from Amazon. The link that'll be in the description for this will be for Amazon. But usually that's where I buy. This one came from AliExpress, and look at this. Pre-greased. I have no idea why there's so much grease on this. Usually that's not the case. And you see here the 3 spacers are with this. 3 spacers are needed if you have a 68mm bottom bracket. In our case, on the Boundary, I'll measure it, but I believe it's 73, which means I'll only need one. Wow, these are even stuck together, which means I'll only need one on the right-hand side. If it's a 68, it would be 2 on the right-hand side, 1 on the left. I believe. I'll have to look that up to confirm. I have to look every time, but I know 73 is 1 on the right. But there's my bottom bracket, external bearing, a lot better than the factory. And then this kit, Alibaba is so inconsistent for me. I have ordered cranksets where I didn't get these little fitting bolts, these little plastic fitting bolts that are hard to find. This kit, check this out, I got 2 of them. So more than I paid for, as well as the chainring mounting bolts. Then I got this. This is another little random packet of stuff. I have no idea why it was in. Here's the only packaging that I had was this. No labels or anything. And what did I do? Yeah, and here we go. And this was the padding. It's like a Chinese newspaper. Don't know. Let's see. Something with flowers. That's all we know. Unless you can read Chinese and tell me what that says. This is 2019. 6/16 of 2019 is when this was from. But that was the only padding that I had. But I got this bag as well. And for some unknown reason, I got my 3 spacers, my 3 2.5mm spacers here. I got 2 more. And then random screws that go to nothing on a crankset, 2 packs of them. And this wrench, that's actually beneficial for putting on these. Actually, sometimes you don't need it, but it's nice to have it. If you do need it and don't have it, then you have to use a flat blade screwdriver and kind of hold it at an angle. But I also got, look at this. Another 2.5mm spacer. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 spacers. Where I've been shorted spacers before, but I've always had a problem with anything on AliExpress, these fixing bolts. But now I have 2. So I have a spare, so hey, thanks for that. Here we go. This is going to be easy. I've done this so many times. I've just measured this. This is 73mm, so I know I'm only going to need my 1 spacer on the right-hand side. First step, make sure these are good and clean. The threads on both sides. Pay attention to this face around the bottom bracket. We don't want any dirt. You might see a little residue staining on the inside of mine, but it is clean. And we're going to take the bottom bracket. I'm actually going to clean this one off. Let me wipe. I'll do this off camera. Man, this thing was absolutely coated in grease. First step, separate the 2 sides. They're going to be marked. One will say R, the other will say L. That's right side, left side. It's also going to have a direction for tightening. This goes backwards. Tightens in the opposite direction. But what we want to do, make sure we've got everything clean. Now that I've just cleaned all that grease off, I'm going to add some grease to the threads here on this bottom bracket on the right side cup. You wipe this on around these threads. Actually, I almost put too much there. But I'm going to wipe this around just to get a good coating there on the threads. I'm going to separate this and wipe around. Put that back in. So there, I've got my threads. I've got clean this a little more here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and insert this, and remember that arrow went this way because this one threads backwards. Take 2 because I messed up already. I cleaned this off. I got all the grease off. I greased these threads. You can see there's some grease there where I just ran it in. But I want to take, remember I had those 3 spacers. I only need 1 of them. This goes on the right side. We've got the right and we've got the left. Well, remember, right and left, and they have arrows. So the right tells me counterclockwise. Got my one spacer on the drive side. That's the side that my chainring will be on. I'm going to carefully make sure that my threads are nice and lined up. Don't cross thread anything. Going to snug this up just hand tight, as tight as I can get it with my hand. Then I'm going to wipe it. Make sure it's all nice and clean up in there, which I'll have some grease you'll see on the crank arm itself. Now I need to do the same thing to the other side, but since this is a 73 millimeter and not a 68, I don't even need a spacer on the other side. So I'm just going to put some grease on these threads, then I'm going to run that side in. And if you wonder what grease I'm using, and I'm just using enough here just to coat these threads good. You wonder what grease I use this. White Lightning Crystal. I get this from Amazon. I'll put a link down in the description to all of this stuff, including the tools I'll be using in just a second. But I like this because it's non-toxic. It has a high temperature range. And I've had really good luck with it. So I'm just going to kind of do this off camera. And again, I see my arrow, so I know that that tightens normally. So though you can't see this, just know that it's tightening in. So I've got my bottom bracket. I've got that tube in there from my bottom bracket. And I'm tightening this up onto that tube. It should hit, yeah, it's starting to hit there. So there we go. And that's about as tight as I can go with my hands. So greasy. Oh, here we go. Use my paper towel. So there, I have both sides of this, but wow, look how good that looks. Both sides of this bottom bracket, just the external bearing bottom brackets make this look so much more like a performance bike. Just that alone. Next step, torquing this down. Need to get this tight on both sides, and you can see the arrow there, but beside that arrow, there is the torque specification, 35 to 50 Newton meters. So I'm going to do both sides now. There's two ways that you can go with tools on this. You can go the cheap way, which is this one, but you kind of have to guess at it. You don't know if you're reaching 35 to 50 Newton meters unless you've done this many times. That's what I started out using, was this. But then Dad bought me this as a Christmas present a couple of Christmases ago. And you see I've taken really good care of it, but it's starting to have some wear where I have used it a bunch. This is a part tool. I'll put a link to both of these down in the description. This fits right over this, and then I'm going to use my torque wrench to make sure that I get the proper 35 to 50 Newton meters. Actually, I forgot one thing. This is 3/8. That little torque wrench that I just showed you is 1/4 inch. So I'm going to be using this, my old Pittsburgh. Came from Harbor Freight. Good Harbor Freight quality 3/8 inch drive. And I'm being facetious when I say Harbor Freight quality, but they do have lifetime warranties, and they warranty their tools, so... Alright, I have my tool on my torque wrench, and I actually already have this torqued because I forgot to hit record. But what I did was, this is 35 to 50 Newton meters. I picked 40. A good middle ground there. This is a foot-pound torque wrench, so that's 25. That converts to 29 foot-pounds. And you'll see it's torqued. This is at 29, so that's 40 Newton meters. I did the other side as well. Remember, this side, it's lefty-tighty, and the other side righty-tighty. This torque wrench works in both directions, so that's good. But there, got my bottom bracket torqued on. Now it's time to install the right crank arm. And here it is. There's only a couple of things I'm going to do to this. Number one, I'm going to wipe it down good. Make sure, especially these two surfaces right here, that's where I'm going to lubricate. Those are the contact points with this external bearing bottom bracket on both sides. So I'm going to wipe this down good. I'm going to take some more of my White Lightning grease, my White Lightning crystal. I love the non-toxic nature. I don't like the toxic greases. And I'm just going to put a little here. Then I'm going to wipe it around. Hope that's on camera. I think it wasn't, but put just a little bit of grease. I'm just going to wipe this around here on this contact surface on both sides. Don't need to worry about the middle here. It's not going to be in contact with anything. So there we go. I've got it greased. And now it's pretty easy. Just insert this crank arm And I go through onto the other side. Now there is a seal. Let me go ahead and pull this back out. You see this cover plate? That's a seal. And that will knock out on the other side, so I hold it to make sure that it stays in place. And I just take the palm of my hand and I tap that on. And there, it's good and seated. There's this crank arm in place. Now I'm going to flip the bike around so that you can see what I do on the other side. Okay, I've got the bike flipped around. You see I've got my drive side crank arm on the other side. So we're on the left side of the bike now. Everything looks good. Make sure these are all clean. I want to point out there is a guide mark. There is one spline, actually two splines, one on the top, one on the bottom, that's wider. And that's going to correspond with the width here. So what you want to do is make sure that the crank arm is aligned at a 180-degree difference from the other side. You don't want this. You don't want to create a kick bike. We've got them both down there. I'm sure that would be interesting to ride, but you don't want to do that. This little seal coming off here. Let me get that back in. And I have test fit this at least 4 times now. I had to beat it on and beat it off a few times. I'm telling you now, I know people are going to disagree with me on this, but this Alibaba stuff, I swear, in my opinion, I think most of it is factory seconds. Everything is just a little off. But let me do this. I'm going to go opposite here so I can see my wide mark. I'm going to line that up with this. And I'm going to press that on. Now this is going on a little easier now because I've had it on and off 2 or 3 times. Before we tighten these pinch bolts down, we're going to put in that fitting nut. That'll draw this together properly. I've got that kit. Remember, it came with 2 of them for some reason this time. There is a specific torque setting, 0.7 to 1.5 Newton meters, which roughly translate the way everyone that I know of, even the local bike shop, does it. You just know the feel. Tighten it firmly with 2 fingers. And there we go, a good 2-finger snug tight. And by the way, I used the little wrench. Came in this kit, remember, with that other fitting nut, so kind of weird, but there we go. Just a good snug with 2 fingers. That draws it in as much as it can and make sure it's free rolling, and this is, yeah, it's pretty good. So not bad so far. Now I need to torque these down. Got this pulled in, need to torque down these 2 nuts, and there is a specific torque setting for these. And these are very important to get torqued properly. If you don't get them torqued properly, your crank arm could come off while you're riding, and that's not a good thing. Or you could strip it out even if it didn't come off. But I set my torque wrench here to 6 Newton meters. I'm going to work my way up. That's how I like to do it, but I'm going to alternate. That's 6, so now I'm going to go up to 9. And there's 9, and you have to go back and forth a few times when you get up to the top torque. But what I'm going to go to, I'm going to go up to my 12 now. I know this is a little boring watching someone torque, but this is the important stuff. There's 12. Like I said, I'm going to go back and forth a few times here. You'll see it takes a little bit each time to balance this out. But once it gets balanced out, it'll settle in at 12. Looks like we're there. Yeah, one last check on this one. That's 12 Newton meters. The crank arms, the bottom bracket, both installed. Now there's one other thing, actually 2 other things, the chainring and the pedals. Let me flip the bike back around and we'll put the chainring on. We're almost done. We're on the downhill slide. We've got our crank arm nice and free moving, properly torqued, so no lateral play. All the benefits we're gaining here from a lighter crankset plus that external bearing bottom bracket. Now it's time to install the chainring and the pedals, and this job is done. The chainring that I'm using today is this. I've used these a lot. A snail, and this one's a 30-tooth, because remember, the factory chainring was a 30-tooth. Well, you may not have known that, but on the Boundary, the factory chainring is a 30-tooth. So this, a snail 30-tooth green, to match that hideous stem, because I bought these at the same time. That's how long I've been anticipating this job. Now, you may fairly be asking, why didn't you install the chainring before you put this crank arm on? That would have been easier. Some people like to do that. Personally, for me, it's easier to put the chainring on after I get the crank arm on. It makes the torque job a little bit easier on me. I'm not fighting with the crank arm, so I'll make sure my torque settings are proper. And it doesn't matter the size of the chainring, but again, this is a 30 tooth. You can thread them on past these humps here. I want to make note, where is it? There, yeah, there it is. It says crank arm and it's got an arrow. So that will go on with this orientation so that this arrow is in the middle of the crank arm. So I'm just going to go through here and work this on. And there we go. Make sure there's my arrows. So that'll mean that this dot goes here. And the snell chain ring, actually, let me get this back off. This snell chain ring, see, it's got these raised areas and it snaps into the hole and they're threaded. So I only need this hex nut to work these on. However, if you have, I've got one here. If you have a standard traditional crank arm that doesn't have any threads, it's just bare crank arm. Actually, let me get another one that doesn't have threads. Yeah, this one's in the box, but you can see it's just a solid hole. There are no threads. Like this here has threads, no threads. If that's the case, you're still going to put the hex nut on the outside, but on the inside, remember I talked about that slotted nut? This thing, it's got that slot. Remember this kit that I bought came, they don't usually, but it came with a wrench just for that. This little pronged end there is made to go down into this and catch those slots. But you can do the same thing just putting a flat blade screwdriver sideways. But one of the benefits here of the snell chain ring is you don't have to worry with any of that. It makes it all easy. Easy breezy. So I'm going to thread this back on. There we go. And I'm going to find my orientation mark. Where are you? There you are. Got that arrow mark right behind the crank arm. I've snapped that in. I'm just going to take one hex nut. I know my hand's blocking the view here, but let me just get this started. I'm trying to do this so that you can see a little better, but it's not working out for me. So now let me get my other 4 put in here, just hand tight. Now it is recommended to use Loctite on these threads. The reason I'm not using it is because I'm doing this for camera A and B. My Loctite's in the basement. I'm too lazy to get it, so I'll have to go back and redo this. But I'm going to go ahead and get this filmed so that you get a good idea. But Loctite those and then just hand tighten them. Make sure they're snugged up and that everything's settled properly, that there's no rattle anywhere. And then it's time to torque. Torque setting 5 to 10 Newton meters for this aluminum chain ring. So that torque wrench that I had already put up, I'm going to go ahead and torque these down. I'm going to cross pattern this. 5 doesn't take much. I'm going to go ahead and go up to 8 or 9. So it's 5 to 10 Newton meters. I'm just going to go to 8 or 9. This is actually 8.2. I'm going to go back and check them again. Remember, should Loctite those. So they should be Loctited and torqued down. 8.2. That's good to go. Now it's time for the pedals. And I'm using my original pedals, and if you've never put pedals on before, there is a marker to let you know left and right. They'll be somewhere on the pedals, either here or here, sometimes inside the pedal face. But there's my right pedal, right side. Want to grease the threads always. There's an easy way to do that. Just get a little grease there and clip it in. That's the thread, and I'm going to do that on the opposite side as well. There we go. I've got threads for the pedals. Make sure I have the right pedals. Always tighten. They're backwards, but down and to the rear. So this one is going to clockwise tighten. So I want to make sure I don't strip this. Very easy to do. These are alloy. So make sure I don't strip this. I'm going to run this in with my finger here. And you can cheat and do the pedal backwards method. But I'm going to hand tighten that. Then I'm going to go back with a 15mm wrench. This is my Park Tool pedal wrench. Gotten a lot of use out of this. I'm trying to do this on camera, which I don't normally do. I want to get this good and snug. And that pedal's on. Look at the weight of it, bringing it down. Now it's time for me to do the opposite side. And these pedals can also use a hex wrench. I could run this in and tighten it with the hex wrench, but I'm just going to use my pedal wrench. It's easier. See if I can do this blindly. So this is opposite side, so I'm going to be going down into the back. So that's the direction counterclockwise. And I'm not even looking, so let's open. It's this left pedal that most people strip when they strip a pedal thread. Be very careful with it, because it's just not natural going backwards like that, at least in my experience. There we go. Now let me tighten this one. That's the pedals. So the crank job is done. The new crankset isn't crank job. So the new crankset job is done, complete with new pedals, the chainring, external bearing bottom bracket. That's how you install an iXF. There's just one more step. We have to get our chain on. How are we going to do that? Because this crank, well, that's all in the way. Little magic. And you can't see this, but let me get the camera. I'm going to press down on my derailleur arm to give myself some free tension, and just put that chain right onto the teeth of that, and let the tension off, and there we go. That is good. Oh, that rear bearing is sounding horrible. Oh yeah, that's even rough when it's going slow, but at least it's not as audible right now. I'll deal with that later. That's an iXF crankset installation. Give this video a thumbs up if you found it helpful. If you haven't subscribed, I hope that you do so. Thanks for watching KevCentral, and have a great day.